3 gunshots was heard across the empty farmland. Bears scattered from the trees. The silence that followed was deafening. Papa Emeka's heart pounded as he ran towards the sound. His bare feet slapped against the dry earth. But when he reached the bush path, no one was there. Only dust rising in the air and the sound of a car engine roaring away. He looked through the fading lights. A black car was speeding down the dirty road. Papa Emeka had good eyes. He memorized the plate number and quickly wrote it in the dust with his finger. KJA 847GH. Then he saw them. A pair of black leather slippers lying abandoned near the bush path. Still warm and still fresh. Papa Emeka picked up the slippers and looked around. Something terrible had happened there. He could feel it in his bone. But how did we get here? Let's go back to 6 months ago. Mr. Richard Ebebu was a respected man in Bayelsa State. He was the vice president of the Estate Agent Association. Everyone knew Richard. Everyone trusted Richard. When people wanted to buy land, they came to Richard. When people wanted to sell land, they came to Richard. He had built his reputation over 15 years of honest business. Richard had a wife named Grace and 2 young children. He drove a modest car and lived in a simple house. He was not rich, but he was honest. That honesty was worth more than money. One morning in March, a man came to see Richard. His name was Pastor George, but everyone called him Brandy. Richard had known George for many years. They went to the same church. They had done business together before.
Richard, my brother,
George said with a big smile,
I have prime land to sell. Very good location. I need your help to find buyers for me.
Richard looked at the document George brought. Everything seemed correct. The papers looked real. George was a pastor. After all, Richard trusted him. How much are you asking? Richard inquired.
9 million naira, George
replied.
The land is worth 15 million, but I need quick sale. Family emergency.
Richard nodded. 9 million naira was a fair price for a good land. He agreed to help George find buyers. Within 2 weeks, Richard found serious buyers. Their names were David and his business partner James. They were developers from Port Harcourt looking for land in Bayelsa State. David was excited about the deal. He had been searching for the right property for months. When Richard showed him the land document, David was convinced. This is perfect, David said. When can we complete the transaction? Richard called George. The buyers are ready. They have the 9 million naira. George sounded pleased.
Excellent. Tell them to bring the money. We can finish everything this week.
But then, George made an unusual request.
Richard, since you know me so well, can you tell the buyers to pay me directly? It will save time.
Richard thought about it. He had known George for years. They were both church members. It seems reasonable. Okay, Richard agreed. I will tell them. David and James brought the 9 million naira in cash. They paid George directly. Just as Richard had recommended, George counted the money, smiled and shook their hands. I will bring the final land documents tomorrow, George promised. Everything will be ready. But tomorrow came and went. George did not show up. David called Richard. Where is George? Where are our documents? Richard called George immediately. George answered but sounded different. His voice was shaky.
Richard, there is a small problem,
George said.
Final papers are in Port Harcourt with my lawyer. I need to travel there to get them. Give me just 3 days.
Richard trusted George. He told David to be patient. 3 days became 1 week. 1 week became 2 weeks. Still no documents. David was still getting angry. Richard, what is happening now? We paid 9 million naira. Where is our papers? Richard called George again and again. Sometimes George answered. Sometimes he did not. When he did answer, he always had new excuses. The lawyer is sick. The papers are still being processed. I need more time. Richard was getting worried. His reputation was on the line. David and James were losing patience. After 3 weeks of delay, Richard demanded to meet George in person. No more phone calls. Richard told George, meet me at Palm Grove Hotel tomorrow evening. Bring the documents or bring back their money. George agreed. He said he will come with his girlfriend Sandra. The next evening, Richard drove to Palm Grove Hotel. He was determined to solve this problem once and for all. Richard sat in his car outside the hotel for a minute. He bowed his head, whispered a short prayer across the steering wheel, and sighed. Then he pushed the door open and walked inside. Several people saw Richard at the hotel that night. He was sitting with George and a young woman in a red dress. The hotel security camera recorded them talking. Richard looked serious. George looked nervous. The woman kept checking her phone. They stayed at the hotel for like 2 hours. Then all three of them left together in George's black car. That was the last time anyone saw Richard alive. The next morning, Grace woke up before sunrise. The other side of the bed was still cold. She touched the empty pillow and whispered, "Richard, where are you?" She sat for a long time, listening to the quiet house. Before the children stirred, she reached her phone and called Richard's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She waited all morning. At noon, she called again. This time, Richard answered. "Richard, where are you, my husband?" Grace asked. "I was so worried last night." "I'm fine," Richard replied, but his voice sounded strange. "I'm handling one transaction that went wrong. I'll be home soon." But Richard did not come home that day or the next day. For the next 3 days, Grace could not reach Richard by phone. When she called, it went to voicemail. But late at night, she would receive text messages from Richard's phone. "Still working on the problem, don't worry. I need more time. Kiss the children for me. Everything will be okay. I love you." Grace found the messages strange. Richard always called. He never just sent text messages. And the messages felt cold. They did not sound like Richard. One night, Grace recorded a short voice note. "Honey, please call me. Just let me hear your voice." She watched her phone screen. The messages stayed undelivered. It was never opened. Grace pressed her chest with her palm. Something was not right. The next morning, Grace walked to the police station alone. She stood by the counter and told the officer, "My husband is missing." He does not just disappear like this. Her voice shook as she spoke. The officer wrote slowly in a big ledger, and Grace felt a heavy fear in her stomach. Meanwhile, David, the man who paid 9 million to acquire the land, was losing his mind. He had paid 9 million naira and had nothing to show for it. He called Richard's phone dozens of times, but Richard never answered. David went to Richard's house. Grace told him that Richard was handling the situation, but she had not seen him in 4 days. "I want my money back," David told Grace. "If Richard cannot produce the documents, I want my 9 million naira back." Grace was confused. "What 9 million naira? Richard never told me about such a large transaction." David explained everything. Grace's heart sank. She realized something was very wrong. David went to the police. He filed a complaint against both Richard and George for fraud. The police arrested George at his house, but George had a surprising story to tell. "I gave the money to Richard," George told the police. "Richard took the 9 million naira and disappeared. I am also a victim. Please, if you see Richard, I would like to know where he is." The police were confused. Where was Richard? Where was the money? They searched Richard's house but found nothing. They checked his bank account, no large deposit. Richard had simply vanished into thin air. Grace could not take it anymore. She organized search parties. Richard's friends and family looked everywhere. They checked hospitals. They checked morgues. They asked everyone in town. Nobody had seen Richard since that night at Palm Grove Hotel. Every evening, Grace sat on the floor with her 2 children. They were asking, "When is Daddy coming back?" She smiled weakly, held them close and said, "Daddy is working. He will come home soon." But when they slept, she covered her face with both hands and cried silently. Then, one search party decided to check the land that George was supposed to sell last. Maybe Richard had gone there to investigate. David joined the search party. They drove to the remote farmland outside town. When they arrived, that was when they met Papa Emeka, the local farmer. "We are looking for a man named Richard," David explained. "He was involved in a land deal here. Have you seen him?" Papa Emeka looked at the strangers carefully. Then his face became serious. "You should not go into that bush," Papa Emeka warned them. "Something bad happened there 6 days ago." "What do you mean?" David asked. Papa Emeka told them about the 3 gunshots, about the speeding car, about the slippers he found. "I kept the slippers though," Papa Emeka said. "I thought someone might come looking for it." He brought out the black leather slippers. David gasped. Grace, who had joined the search, began to cry. "These are Richard's slippers," Grace sobbed. "He wore them to the hotel that night." Papa Emeka also showed them the plate number he had written down, KJA 847GH. The search party immediately called the police. Police arrived within hours. Papa Emeka led them to the exact spot where he heard the gunshot. The police brought trained dogs. The dogs began sniffing around the bush. After 20 minutes, one dog started barking frantically at a spot covered with fresh palm branches. The police carefully removed the branches. Underneath it, they found recently disturbed earth. They began to dig. 5 feet down, they found Richard's body. He had been shot 3 times in the chest. The same 3 shots Papa Emeka had heard 6 nights earlier. Grace collapsed when they told her the news. Richard was dead. Her husband had been murdered. Detective Inspector Johnson took over the case. He was experienced in murder investigation. The first clue was the plate number Papa Emeka had memorized, KJA 847GH. Detective Johnson ran the plate number through police record. The card was registered to Pastor George Brandy. The second clue was Richard's phone. The police found it buried with his body. The last call Richard made was to George at 9:47 p.m. on the night he disappeared. But the text messages to Grace after that night came from a different phone entirely. Detective Johnson arrested George again, this time for murder. But George had an alibi. He claimed he dropped Richard off at a bus station that night and never saw him again. "Search my house," George challenged. "You will find nothing." The detective did search George's house. He found nothing suspicious. But then, Detective Johnson remembered the woman at the hotel, the young woman in the red dress, George's girlfriend, Sandra. Police traced Sandra to a small apartment across town. When they arrived, they found her packing suitcases. "Going somewhere?" Detective Johnson asked. Sandra looked terrified. I'm just visiting my family." But Detective Johnson noticed something interesting. Sandra had expensive new jewelry, new clothes, and new shoes. "Where did you get money for all these things?" Detective asked. Sandra could not answer. The police searched her apartment, hidden under her mattress. They found 1.2 million naira in cash. They also found Richard's wallet and his car keys. Sandra broke down and confessed everything. Sandra told the police the whole story. George had been running land scams for months. He would show fake documents to Richard, who would find buyers because everyone trusted Richard's reputation. George would collect the money from buyers, then disappear. When buyers complained, George would blame Richard and claim Richard took the money. The plan worked several times before, but this time, with David's 9 million naira, Richard became suspicious. Richard demanded to see the original land document. George panicked. He knew Richard would discover that the documents were fake. If Richard reported him to the police, George would go to prison for fraud. So, George made a terrible decision. He decided to kill Richard. On that night at the hotel, George told Richard they needed to go check the land together. Sandra was there to make the story believable. "I told Richard that the landowner wanted to meet him personally," Sandra confessed. Richard trusted George, so he agreed to go. They drove Richard to the remote farmland. When they arrived, George pulled out a gun. Richard was shocked. "George, what are you doing?" "I'm sorry, Richard," George said, "but you know too much." Richard tried to run. George shot him 3 times. Sandra helped George bury the body and cover it with palm branches. Then, Sandra used Richard's phone to send fake messages to Grace, making it seem like Richard was still alive and handling businesses. George paid Sandra 1.2 million naira to keep quiet and help him cover up the murder. With Sandra's confession, police had enough evidence to arrest George for murder. They found the gun hidden in George's church office. Ballistic tests confirmed it was the weapon that killed Richard. They also found evidence that George had been running land scams for over 2 years now, selling more than 30 million naira from unsuspecting buyers. George finally confessed when faced with all the evidence. "I never meant to kill him," George cried. "Richard was my friend, but he was going to destroy me. I had no choice." But Detective Johnson knew better. "You had many choices, George. You chose to steal, you chose to lie, and you chose to murder an innocent man. All for what?" all for money. George was sentenced to death by hanging for murder, and Sandra was sentenced to 25 years in prison for accessory to murder and fraud. David and the other victims got some of their money back from George's hidden account, but most of the stolen money was gone. Grace struggled to raise her 2 children alone. The community rallied around her, providing support and assistance. Richard's funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Everyone remembered him as an honest man who was betrayed by someone he trusted. Papa Emeka became a local hero. His sharp memory and quick thinking had solved a murder case. If I had not written down that plate number, Papa Emeka reflected, a killer will still be walking free. The police commissioner awarded Papa Emeka a certificate of recognition for his civic duty. But Papa Emeka was humble. I only did what anyone should do, he said. When you see something wrong, you must speak up. The case taught everyone in Bayelsa an important lesson. Human beings can be very wicked, but even wickedness leaves footprints. A farmer's sharp ear, a pair of abandoned slippers, a license plate number scribbled in the dust. These small details exposed the truth and brought justice for Richard. Grace visits Richard's grave every Sunday after church. She brings fresh flowers and tells him about the children's progress in school. Your death was not in vain, she whispered to his gravestone. The truth came out. Justice was served. And in the small farming village, Papa Emeka still tends his cassava plants, but now he watches more carefully. He listens more attentively because he learned that sometimes ordinary people become heroes simply by paying attention to details that others might ignore. Sometimes the difference between justice and injustice is just a farmer who writes down a plate number. This story reminds us that trust can be weaponized by evil people, but truth will always find a witness, even in the darkest crime. Small clues can expose big lies. We must all be like Papa Emeka, observant, brave, and ready to stand up for justice when it matters most. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to share this story with your family and your friends who might love to see them. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.